on that. We should stick with policy with this, Dr. Then.
Okay.
I think we're
Sounds
in
good.
pretty good shape.
Okay.
All right, ready when you are. Peggy, when you're ready.
Ready? Okay. Okay, I'd like to bring the school board meeting, August 17, 2016 to order. And we'll start with a roll call, and I'll start on my left-hand side with Heather.
Heather Furlong, School Board.
Brian Garland, School Board.
Sean Carroll, School Board.
Russ Holden, Superintendent.
Paul Scarron, School Board.
April Royce, School Board.
Kate O'Connor, Board Secretary.
Okay. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is right there. You want to lead us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, can we have a moment of silence, please? Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll get right into the board minutes for June 1st, 2016. We'll review those, and to review those, I need someone to make a motion.
Make a motion we accept the minutes as presented from June 1st, 2016 School Board meeting.
Okay, motion made by Brian. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, seconded by Heather. And do we have any discussion on the minutes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
So I watched it
Did you have-
online. Is
Okay.
or do I abstain? How does that work?
You would abstain,
Okay,
yes.
even though I was.
Yeah. Okay, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? One abstention, April. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda review.
We're just going to add, we had an additional retirement, so under action item C, there'll be 2 announcements of retirement
Okay,
instead of 1.
so under C,
Yeah,
okay.
so just add another one there, just so you know. And that is it.
Okay. We move on. Public forum. Public forum time. Would anybody like to speak towards the agenda in the public? Yes. Yep, please.
My name is John Brandolini, 7 Westwood Road, full-time resident and voter, and I'd like to talk about the agenda items labeled public forum. I think that you guys ought to consider allowing people to talk about non-agenda items. I know, Sean, you talked about, people can email you or voicemail you or have a conversation with you or write letters to the editor, but none of those go on as a public record. So I think as elected officials, you should allow the community and your fellow citizens to present items that aren't on the agenda just so that they can express their opinion. You and Russ have been both to the Board of Selectmen meetings, and you can see that that happens at those meetings. They're conducted in a fair manner, and people get a chance to be on public record as to what they have to say. So I just wanted to mention that. I'd like you guys to consider allowing people to talk about items not on the agenda. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay. Anybody else in the public like to bring?
John Augustine, Stagecoach Road, Sunapee. My comment relates to the minutes that were just approved. In the minutes, it mentioned that April Royce was absent from the June meeting. So I just had a question for April. Did you consider participating via Skype? Because I thought at one of the earlier meetings, the town attorney said that would be a legal means of participation.
So yeah, interesting that you mentioned that. Basically what happened to me last meeting was I had to unexpectedly go out of town for work. I knew this a couple of weeks ahead of time, and I had actually made arrangements with Sean and Russ to call in. That was the best course of action. For whatever reason that night it ended up not working, and I got a call from Sean about 10 minutes before the meeting started saying they couldn't work it out. At that time I did offer that I could use my work line. We have a teleconferencing line to call in, but for whatever reason it didn't work. I did request from Russ that we put it on the agenda. My feeling is I understand that sometimes when people are out of town, it doesn't work. When the lawyer was here, Brian expressed sometimes he's in a different time zone. My situation is different. When I travel, I only go to Maryland or Canada, so the time zone is fine for me. So that is something that we are pursuing that I had hoped we were going to discuss tonight. I think that's what your email said, right, is we'll discuss tonight. We do need a policy in place. I think that's good protection for us. The way the lawyer expressed it is we have the right to do it, but it's not common practice. So I want to make sure that we put it in place because I take the commitment I made seriously and I make time to be available for these meetings, even if I'm not physically here. I understand that having a policy, though, protects us. We don't want to open the door for somebody to agree to be on the board and then never show up. So I think there's a balance to be had there. I would have liked to have participated in the discussions of the last meeting. I certainly appreciate that it's online now because I was able to watch it instead of missing it, but that is in the plan. I agree. I think we should have that option to call in when we're out of the country, but it should be in moderation, not because I'm home and I didn't feel like coming in kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
It answers my question that I asked, but I guess it leads to a follow-up question.
Sorry.
So is there a technical constraint with this room that wouldn't allow?
No, what happened was we looked into it. Russ looked into it the day after the meeting because Barbara Lohman said that we can do it. It is an option and it's a viable option. So Russ looked into it and she gave us some feedback, and the feedback was that we need to make a policy and we need to also set some, she said, if you do open that door, then there are a number of other things that come along with it. So tonight, April, being new as a board chair, our board person, wanted to have it on the agenda tonight. We have to, as a board, decide to put it on, which tonight we're going to decide if we put it on the agenda and if we want to make it a policy, which I don't know. I'm one board member, so I would assume we're definitely going to talk about it. And then we were going to have the lawyer draft some kind of a policy on it because we have to figure out what kind of policy we want. Our policy is probably not going to match someone like Nashua or Manchester, but we are going to look at it and decide as a board if we want that to happen, what we want to have it, what we want in the policy, and how restrictive it is, what the constraints are. Does it make sense to do it when someone's in Europe? Like April said, if someone's this side of the states in the same time zone, you're not given, it's not in a position. But I'm just saying these are ideas. I'm not saying this is real, but so those are the things that we got to think about. The other thing too is it really a necessity if you have a quorum? If you don't have a quorum, then that would be great to have it. That way you don't have to reschedule the meeting. Our meetings are once a month, which the board wants to have meetings once a month. So if we're going to do once a month, then it's nice to be able to say, okay, we definitely want to have a quorum every time. So if every time we have a quorum, if we have to use something by Skype or whatnot, then we need to, then that might work. And then what happens if all of a sudden the connection goes when you're halfway through the meeting? You know what I mean? So there's a number of things that we have to discuss as a board that's going to be on the table. So I think it's going to be a good conversation to have. But we're not restricting anybody from it. We're not restricting April. It's just that you have to do the policy in the right manner. You have to have a first reading and then a second reading, and that's when it gets approved. So regardless of when we do it, we have to have 2 meetings to allow the process to make it work.
And to be clear, this is not something I anticipate coming up again. It was sort of an unexpected training, so it's not,
Right.
I don't intend to need to use it, but I want to make sure we have something in place in case anybody has that situation.
But you actually attempted it that night, is that right? You said
That's-
you attempted it?
Could you
That's
just?
correct. You want to go ahead?
No, go ahead. It's just
We
that-
had the agreement that I would call in. It was middle school orientation or something, so we had some problems getting the technical assistance. I'm still not clear why we couldn't call in under my work line, but that was the plan, was to say, we're not making a policy, we're not setting a precedent, but because I had requested, we were going to allow it the one time and then put it on discussion. No, I had
If you're
offered
gonna,
any-
Jody, excuse me for a minute. If you're gonna talk, Jody, I don't want to be disrespectful, but you at least need to say your name and that you are, recognize yourself and a citizen, and you need to get up to the mic.
Well, it was like a big word thing, so
I understand, and I don't want to be the bad guy, but, you know, I've got to, yes, you can. Thank you.
Jody Manson, Young Hill Road. So was it Skype you were attempting to use?
I had offered anything. We had left it up to John Reed of whatever was best for him. I contacted him 2 weeks before, after talking with Sean, to make sure we were prepared. When I learned the day of that it wasn't working, I offered a Cisco WebEx or a teleconference line that I have access to through my professional work that we
So
could
you
use.
don't know if it was Skype or something else?
Let me just clarify. April contacted John Reed. John doesn't get to make that decision for the board, and neither do I get to make that decision for the board. The board needs to make that decision. I contacted the
What
attorney,
decision?
whether people can electronically or communicate without being at the board.
That's what I'm trying to clarify,
Yeah.
actually, Russ, because it sounded like the attempt was made, but something went wrong from what April
No,
said.
So I
so-
contacted John
Everything
Reed
said
at
sounded
the
like they
advice
decided
of
not to do it, so
Sean
I was just
Carroll.
trying
Right.
to clarify.
So John doesn't have the right to make that decision, and the board has to make that decision. Contacted the lawyer said, you really, before you open that door, as April said, put practices and protocols in place, which we did not have. That night, we did have technical issues. We weren't prepared to do that. Ray wasn't prepared. There was a middle school parent night that was in here. We called Rachel before and said, we're not going to make it work. Understandable. We need to set practice and policy and procedures before we step into
I understand, that
this.
just sounded like two different stories, like you tried and couldn't, and then
No.
the policy wasn't there. So
We
that's
weren't
what
prepared,
was.
we weren't prepared, and nor was the board granted permission to do that as a whole. No individual board member can impose something on the board as a whole has to have that discussion and make that action.
Right.
Getting back to your question, John, I have no problem with people asking questions from the public. The thing is, we are conducting business here, and we want to conduct business. If you don't have to email me with questions, you can email me with questions so that I can give them to Russ so that he can get them on the agenda, because that's the procedure, is myself and Russ make the agenda. The board members, if there are anything that they want on the agenda, we try to do at the meeting, at the end of this meeting. So end of every meeting, we try to set the agenda. There are going to be things that come up. Russ is the one that you could contact, and he would talk to me, and we would get it on the agenda. 9 times out of 10, he will get it on the agenda because he's going to set it out. Last year, we had a number of things that came up that were more personal than anything, and there are things that that need to be talked about, and there's some things that can't be talked about. And maybe we have to put a policy out, or maybe do something with a policy as far as saying that. And I thought that every meeting that we had, I was explaining the fact that there were certain things you can't talk about, and it was basically being, I guess the envelope was being pushed, so sometimes things have to be shut down, and that's what happened. But we are interested in listening to what the public has to say. But it's really directed towards what's on the agenda. If you want something on the agenda, we can definitely put it on the agenda. Yeah.
So if I
My
could,
point, it was just an ad hoc comment as things come up. If people want to voice their opinions or concerns or ideas to you without having to go through putting it on an agenda and coming back a month later. I just think as elected officials, you should allow the citizens that have elected you to bring up ideas as they want so that they're on public record. That was my only comment. I didn't want to have to go through the whole process of waiting 6 weeks to bring up an issue because I got to bring it up here. You talk about it, put it on next month's agenda. Sometimes things come up quicker than that, and I just think you guys ought to allow the public to bring up issues as they want to, as you being elected officials. That was my only comment.
Okay.
and I hope, John, that as we move forward, and I hope everyone in the audience and anyone that watches at home, that we can be a lot more considerate of one another in our community and respectful towards one another. Sunapee is a very small place. We all see what's going on nationally, and I certainly hope that we don't need to mirror that. I think there were some things done last year, and I certainly don't think we need to repeat those things. I think we all understand what some of the issues were on the table. I think we've dealt with that, and I think if we can just communicate in a professional, respectful manner, I think we can get a lot more done and get to that point, John, where we should be able to have questions come about something that somebody may ask, but keep some of the personal things out of the limelight and out of the conversations here publicly, because they're an appropriate place to have those conversations. So again, I just hope we can put what has been done behind us and move forward respectfully, and work on communication with each other, because, you know, this is your school board. They're here and they work for you, and we should be able to have that open dialogue.
So is this something we're gonna put on for discussion, or,
So we could, it would be policy,
okay, right,
so that would have to kick back to policy committee,
okay.
and that would be really up to the board if they feel at that point in time they want to ask the policy committee to do that.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to having the public, non-agenda items comments, but I was just thinking maybe the second public forum, not the first, so that we can still keep on our schedule of everything, if we were to allow it, and then have special start in the second public forum if we were to do something.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Ray Porter, Goshen, New Hampshire. Back to the Skype issue. State law covers that under RSA 91A:2, either 2 or 3. State law specifically
Yep.
allows for that to happen.
Correct.
I don't know that you need a policy that takes 2 months for you to have the first and second reading in order for that to happen.
Again, we spoke to our attorney advised us to set practice and procedures in place so that when we open up the practice, people understand what that practice is and how to go about it. Just as April said, for some of the reasons, do we need to have it? If we have it, is it only for when we use it, don't have a quorum? How many times can an individual use it? What are the safeguards in place to make sure that when we go to non-public, someone is in non-public alone, that it's not being shared, there's not other people in the room, that they can be heard, that we can be heard, that the audience can be heard. So there are a lot of different pieces that need to be in place, and those should be put in place in a procedural document and put into practice. And those things should be in place by our attorney, said to put those in place before you open that door and let it go. Because once you've walked in, it's tough to walk back out. But you're absolutely right, Ray. There's RSA that says that it is allowed to happen.
Brian?
So can we ask the policy committee to go back and look at the policy for public comment, just to see where we're at right now and see what we might want to change it to going forward?
Joy, you want to make that in a motion?
Can I make a motion that we ask the policy committee to look at our public input policy that's currently in place, evaluate ways to make it more open?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, motion made by Brian, seconded by April. And any more discussion?
I think the concern there is that truly anything that's personnel or personal related is completely out of the realm. So, and I don't know if we also want to add, I don't know if 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, a time zone, just to make sure that we're able to keep things moving as well.
There is some time in there.
Okay, so. That's all I have.
Anything else? Do you? Heather?
No.
Okay. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstention? Motion carries. Okay, so look at that. The other thing too is the revision, revision on the audio thing. You want to put that in so we can always discuss it tonight?
So you can
Wanna
decide,
discuss it tonight?
yeah, well, I would put it
Which way?
into a motion to bring it to policy and have the policy committee do it.
Okay,
Right, because it should go right through your policy committee.
okay.
Again, that would come from a motion
Okay.
from the floor.
Why don't we, seems how April,
On the subject.
well, you were,
Yeah.
you were more active in talking about it.
Sure. I make a
Would you
mo-
like to make that motion?
Sure. I make a motion that we put a policy in place for,
Send it to the policy committee.
I make the motion that we send to the policy committee to develop a policy to allow for some sort of conferencing in with all the concerns and stipulations we need.
Okay. Okay, motion's made by April. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Brian, and I think we've discussed it. Does anybody have anything else they want to add to that? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Paul, you got some more?
That's what I said.
I said aye. I'll be working on this for.
Okay, does anybody else in the public? Anything else in the public forum? Okay. Okay, why don't we move on to school updates? Jody?
We've had a busy summer.
Yeah.
Lots of maintenance, updates being done. We've got new carpet, phenomenal, in the main hallway. The guys have been doing a great job, they've been putting things up. We had summer camp program over the summer, with a new partner, 8 of them tuition students, so that's great for us. And one more possible with middle school siblings, so we're getting our numbers.
Nice. How many kindergarten kids coming in? Sorry.
20.
And of the tuition students, are they related to the Montessori decision, or are they separate from that?
They're kind
It's
of-
really only fifth grade that would affect you.
Most of the ones that we have, actually all of the ones that we are getting right in our fifth graders, that's when they start to
Yep.
have choice. So that's 5 of our students so far, with possible.
Anybody else have anything for Jody? Okay, Sean?
Like Ms. Bergen, lots of maintenance going on in the building, all the circles to that. We won a really impressive award this summer. The National Endowment for the Humanities gave a national award to our advanced placement U.S. history course, and Mr. Palin, who's chronicling America with historic American newspapers. It was a data challenge. Last year, Mr. Palin presented to the board on last year's data challenge. This year, again, received a national award. So Mr. Palin and a student from the Advanced Placement History class will go to Washington, D.C., paid for by the National Endowment for the Humanities to present the data challenge. So
Excellent, very
impressive
good.
that we received this summer. I see later on the list, we've got 2 new teachers starting this year, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Legendre. Sports teams are starting to get going this week. Looks like good numbers across the board. You know, soccer teams, golf teams, volleyball teams, so we're in pretty good shape right now. And the next meeting or October, we'll go through the testing results. We'll start to receive word back on advanced placement testing, SAT scores, which are all pretty good. We'll go into detail on that. One of the next meetings.
Anybody have any questions of Sean? Good, thank you. Action items, first one is, is going to be the, what's that?
Want me to do the superintendent's?
You can do that.
I'll be happy to let that one go, believe me.
Perfect.
As Sean and Jody said, just lots and lots of stuff going on in our buildings. Just echo Sean's kudos to Ray and his class. What an excellent achievement and recognition. And also, as Sean said, in probably October, we'll go over our test results for the Smarter Balance, SAT, and AP. Preliminary results are, I don't know really how to say it, but outstanding. Outstanding across the board, and kudos to Jody and Sean and Megan and Tara for their hard work in working with our teachers and working with our kids, and the performance that continues to be impressive. Some projects that were going on, there's some new flooring going on, as Jody said, some carpeting. The computer in the old CAD lab have been replaced as part of the cycle. Gym floors in the process of being restriped and refinished down the Sherburne. You might have noticed the conference room's got a little bit of a makeover going to it. When you walked in today, we moved the fitness room up from the Sherburne gym up to behind the stage. You probably noticed the LED lights. So last year we did the LED light project. The Peter Salvini, the installer, came in and he said he didn't like what the lights were doing. They were sort of having this bubble to them, and a couple of, now I'm going to call them ballasts, but they're not ballasts because they were replaced, but they were blowing, and so we replaced all of them. They went and got a new product out of Canada and brought it in and put them in place, and now they actually have a 3-tiered system on them where you can put them at full, you can put them at half, and you can put them at a quarter. So they almost have a dimmer system in them, so teachers can pick what it is they choose and how they choose. So that's a lot that's been going on. We've had our chemicals removed. Department of Education came in and did their food service review on Bob at the end of last year. He came through that review for the first time, came through with flying colors, had 3 real simple action items that had to address regarding content of sugar in some of our soft drinks and some protocol paperwork stuff, but overall, just glowing report from the state in his food service. Again, this is Bob's going to his 3rd year. Bob ended up in the black this year, so he was 2,000 to the good. Folks remember that program has been in the hole for a number of years, a considerable amount of money, and so just a big kudos to Bob for the work he's done and the efforts that he's done in the Girls in the Cafeteria for just turning that program around, really turning that program around. Matt continues to work with his guys and just doing a great job this year. Again, we had a lot of things set up, a lot of projects going on. I'm going to talk a little bit later about our ventilation issue that we've somewhat discovered in our boiler room and some issues that we're having there and how we potentially might be able to solve the final heat issue in our gym. But we have some signage going up in both buildings for emergency management. We had our 911 calls set up and our phone system reestablished to work the statewide 911 system, which was a recommendation, if you remember, from the Department of Homeland Security. So that now is in place. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on, but I just want to make people aware that we do have an active shooter drill coming up on August 27th, which is a Saturday at 8 a.m. I'll talk more about that later. But also a reference to special education is having Peg Dawson come back on August 24th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. here at Sunapee Middle High School. And all parents and community members are welcome to look at executive functioning skills for kids. And so feel free to spread the word. We put it out on Twitter. We put it all over the place. And all the whole community is welcome, whether they have children or not, come in and learn it. But it's a very informative session. It will be a very informative session. So unless people have questions for me, I'm sure we'll get into more things as we go.
I just make sure the replacing of the lights and the gym floor, is that the gym floor here?
Sherburne.
At Sherburne, okay. And the LED lights, is that also at Sherburne, or is that?
So the LED lights we put in Sherburne, those were new this year, and the ones all here that were put in last year were replaced.
Thank you.
And there was no charge on any of that.
Okay. Action items.
Action item, number 1. So I think at the end, well, I know in my first year, I spoke to the board about a potential summer camp with a Japanese exchange program. We threw it around a little bit. I've tried to get some interest in the community. Didn't get a lot at that point in time, and I kind of let it subside for a little bit. I was approached by a gentleman at the beginning of this year looking at cultural exchange students. And Sunapee has had cultural exchange students before, and they commented, and again, it's exactly what it is. It's on cultural exchange. What I'm asking for now, what we're going to be looking for, are more kids that are coming on an academic or a F1 scholarship instead of a J1 scholarship. And an an F1 visa is for kids coming from other countries, coming to American schools to study here. And one of the issues that we would face is how do we put Sunapee worldwide? How do we get our name globally? And how do we know what students are coming from where and what those students are and what their work habits are and what those families look like and how all that works? It's a pretty intense process, and it really would take an individual to do that from the school to organize that whole sort of nuts and bolts of that system. Working with Philip works in New Zealand, and this is something that he's done, and he's sort of a broker, a middleman, if you will, where he goes out and he promotes our school and promotes Sunapee and sort of publishes us and is our promoter, and find students from around the globe who may be interested in coming to our school to study. What he would do would be help attract students and then work with us to make sure that's the right fit, and then work with us to